Welcome to the Tired F1 Pod. Welcome to Volume 6. Shez, how are you doing?
Yikes. Volume 6. It's a long way from the start.
It is a long way from the start. Needless to say, we're tired, and the reason for that is we are catching up after a week full of uncountable news that has been seismic in every which way, right? We were knee deep in Lewis Hamilton news and all the machinations and everything that could happen with his move, and the news is still filtering in day after day. But we're trying our best to get caught up here. As you know, this is the Tired Pod, and there's a reason why we're getting to today's volume as late as we are. But we hope to provide you with a lot more insight and a little bit of depth in what we're doing. So, Shaz, I thought that we could start today's pod with the big news that got buried in all the Lewis Hamilton stuff, which is the Andretti Global entry into Formula One has officially been declined for the 2026 season by Formula One management, only after being accepted by the FIA, which just adds to levels of weirdness. And I think for a lot of our viewers, I think we want to kind of get into a little bit of context and maybe some details on sort of what has been going on behind the scenes. And the well-versed Formula One aficionado that you are, I thought that we could start by having you kind of give us a little bit of a rundown of what it is, and then we can jump right into reacting to it. So, how do you feel about that? Andretti Global not making it to the grid? That's got to be a big blow, right?
Yeah, right. And yeah, as you say, if this had happened at any other time without all of the other news that had happened, then this would have been in the headlines for at least 2 or 3 weeks. But as it is, the power of Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari have usurped everybody else, and here we are talking about what should be one of the biggest storylines of the year, a week late. So apologies for that, everyone. But here we go. Hopefully, we can have some fun talking about Andretti. Um, so just as a quick background, so we know what we're talking about. There were the FIA in February of last year released a uh, a tender, or at least invited expressions of interest from prospective teams that wanted to be the 11th team on the grid. Um, this was put out by Mohammed bin Sulayem, and clearly the idea was to get an 11th team on the grid. And there were, I think, four prospective candidates. So Andretti Global was one of them. Rodin Carlin was one of them. High Tech was one of them,
Seven.
and Lucky Sons was the other. Um, and out of that process, the FIA felt that only Andretti Global met the criteria to be approved as a candidate to be the 11th team on the grid. And I think at this point, it's probably worth just talking about very quickly what the FIA criteria for entry is. And I've got that here. So what they published at the time is that there were 8 points. The first is that the team that's applying needs to have the technical ability and resources. Um, the team has to have the ability to raise and maintain sufficient funding to meet its financial obligations and be competitive. Uh, the team has to be able to meet and comply with its obligations under the FIA sporting, technical, and financial regulations. There has to be a detailed business plan. Um, the team's experience and capabilities in the automobile and/or motorsports sector, including technical experience, racing experience, facilities, equipment, and engineering resources, and relevant staff headcount and experience are taken into account. Number 6, whether the team and all the individuals proposing to the participants in the ownership, control, or management of the team are fit and proper persons. We can talk about that. 7, we talked about sustainability. And 8, the FIA's assessment of the value that the candidate may bring to the championship, including considerations of its reputation and integrity. So these are the FIA's criteria for Andretti being allowed into F1 as the 11th team. And Andretti passed that set of criteria and moved on to the next step. And the next step, which is also detailed in what the FIA's criteria is that the F1 commercial rights holder may also um, want to apply some of their own rigor to this and apply their own criteria to whether they accept that 11th team or not. So before we go on to what happened at Andretti, what happened with F1? Amar, what do you think about that?
I mean, I'm laughing halfway through what you're saying, right? Because again, without even getting into all the technicalities, right, of whether Andretti can check those boxes. As a fan that has followed the sport for many years, and the Andretti name that brings with it everything that it can, I cannot think of a more deserving team just on the surface of that. Now, of course, there are certain criteria that need to be met, and that's why those exist, right? I do want to get into a little bit of why this is happening, right? But I think that in the end, for me, this is all about money grab, right? And it is all about, in this case, the sort of the opposite of that, which is you're trying to protect what the teams and Liberty Media, I guess, to a certain extent, value the property that is Formula One today.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think just sort of amazing. But yeah, I'll let you go on though.
So let's get into that a little bit. So after the FIA had approved Andretti Global and rejected all of the other bids, the bid went forwards to F1,
Mhm.
and F1 then had to make a decision. And 2 weeks ago now, we finally got that decision. And I mean, I agree with you. I think the whole thing was absolutely nuts. And I've got views on what happened on the start of this, and I've got views on what's happened since. And I don't think anybody, whether it be the FIA or F1, come out of it smelling particularly of roses. This seems to be mishandled from the beginning. But I do think, look, I'm pretty upset about what's happened because I feel like Andretti have definitely been um, are just caught in the crossfire between the FIA and F1. There's an ongoing feud that's just short of war going between these two, and poor old Andretti have been, through no fault of their own, they made an application as they should do and have been caught in the middle. But I do want to go through some of the arguments
Yeah.
that Andretti that F1 made as to why Andretti can't be in, and then I definitely want to get into why this has happened because I think it's very interesting. But
I do
but
want you to get into that, but sorry, I'm interrupting you here. But I think that we have to start by again doubling down on our disappointment, right? And I don't think there was a better way of symbolizing that particular disappointment with the social media post that had Mario Andretti himself say, I'm shocked beyond words. I'm disappointed. I'm gutted. I can't remember the word he used, but I think it was something to the effect of, I am just so disappointed. I don't have anything else to say. And believe me, they
yeah.
should feel that way in every which way. And I think that as fans of the sport, as growing fans in the United States, there couldn't be a worse decision that Formula One could have made. Everything else aside. So yeah, I do want you to get into it, but
Yeah,
I just want to
yeah,
double
yeah.
down
Listen,
on that.
I completely agree with you, and it points to a lack of it points to a lack of understanding of what the fan base are actually after for a sporting empire that pride themselves on providing entertainment and knowing where the pulse is. This is a massive misstep. I just don't understand how they can look at what fans want and then say we're going to do the complete opposite. I can understand from a commercial point of view, and we'll get into that, but from an optics point of view, there's nothing about this that looks good. Nothing. Like you can tell from the social media outcry how wrong they've got it, but they've made it. They've made their decision, and yeah, I mean the document they put out is really awful. Like some of the things they put in there are just really the whole document. If you look at it, feels like they've already made a decision, and then in the post hoc, they're coming up with reasons why they've made that decision, and some of them are awful. So I just wanted to go through a couple of them. I wanted to take your thoughts. So we're not going to go through the entire document, it's too long. But I'm going to point out a couple of them. So the first point I wanted to look at, it says, our assessment process has established that the presence of an 11th team would not, in and of itself, provide value to the championship. Okay, what do you think of that?
I mean, hey, the CC Haas, right? How about that? Like for starters, right? Like the idea that I mean, well, first of all, we have to decide what value is to the championship itself, right? I think the implication in some ways is, will they be competitive? And of course, a new entrant should show potential for being competitive, but I think that sort of reads like, hey, you have to start competing for podiums right away. It's like that doesn't happen, and that takes years, right? But go ahead, what are you going to say?
But I think it's even more fundamental than that, because what they're saying here is that the presence of an 11th team would not in and of itself provide value. So does that mean that the entire exercise was actually for nothing, that there
So
was no intention?
why have an 11 team, right, to
Exactly,
begin with?
exactly. Why do it? And if that's the case, did you tell Andretti that? Because they've invested a huge amount of money. They've recruited a whole bunch of people. So Autosport put up a nice article just over a week ago now about what preparations are going on in North Carolina, and it's it's not a small operation. Everyone saw the pictures of the facilities that they've got there, looking for all the world like the MTC. And then F1 have kind of said, well, we never really had any intention of putting an 11th team on the grid anyway. Where's the accountability for that then?
You mentioned a couple of the teams, but there were seven initial applicants, right? Or applications for expressing interest, right? And yes, it's an exercise. So this again, I think a lot of this reads like a bad team project, right? Where you've collectively decided, okay, this is our outcome, and then it seems like they outsourced pieces of it and said, okay, point number one, you figure it out. Maybe they sent a couple of points to the teams themselves, right? Because we know that I think almost all the teams were opposed to the idea of this for obvious commercial reasons. And they're like, yeah, let's cobble this and put it together. And so it is just, it fundamentally makes no sense that an 11 team, when the 11 team is Andretti, would have no value to the, like, you could take out, Haas, you could take out WeCarb, you could even potentially argue to take out Alpine just the way they have been, which has sort of been in no man's land outside of getting that investment from a bunch of celebrities that I really think have kept them afloat. They're irrelevant in many different ways, right? And I'm not suggesting that you should do that, but the idea that you can say an 11 team when it is this guy, this family, this team, they're running IndyCar, they're running Formula E, they're running like every other series that you can imagine. And so for you to come back and say that they will not add value to this doesn't make any sense. Look, we can disagree on what the amount of the value should be and if the 200 million pound entry price makes sense or not. Is it pound or euros? I'm not sure, but one or the other. You can maybe that's a fair thing to say. Okay, the price needs to be steeper. Fair enough. But the idea that they do not bring in any value just makes no sense. Like that shouldn't even be there.
Yeah.
That's like saying, hey, forget it, man. I don't want anyone else to this party. Like, sorry, we're at capacity.
I think that is what they're saying. And I think this point sets the tone for the entire document, because it's very much saying we don't want an 11th team, right? But we're doing this. And they've laid out their stall immediately that we don't think an 11th team is actually going to add any
Just say
value.
that.
So the
Just
rest of
say
it,
that.
I think they could have ended it there and then left the whole document, but instead they've gone on. So here you go. Here's the next one I just wanted to look. I wanted to talk about. So I've got here the most significant way in which a new entrant would bring value is by being competitive, in particular by competing for podiums and race wins.
CC
Right.
Haas on there.
Right. Okay.
CC
So
Haas,
let's get into that.
CC
So,
Alpha
so
Tower.
before we get into the okay, Haas and VCarb should be doing these things already, and they're not. I take that point, but before this document came out, I would have said that actually, Haas, especially because they're the ones that will come under the most scrutiny when it comes to this, is that Haas have really they stuck by F1 through the hard times, right? So you can understand showing them a bit of loyalty, and we know that bringing in an 11th team means splitting up the pie a little bit more, so that potentially unfairly discriminates against Haas more than it might do for others because they're at the back of the grid. But then you have to ask yourself the question, why are they at the back of the grid? Gunther Steiner was the guy that really got them through, right? He got them commercial deals when nobody else wanted to invest off the back of his persistence and his personality. And they are here because of the Rich Energy deal, the Uralkali deal, and now the MoneyGram deal. And all of the other sponsors that are on the team, they're there because of him, and he's now gone. So the value that was there in that team was intrinsically entwined with him, and he's not there anymore. So the whole argument that they should be protected against an 11th entry, I think that goes out of the window when you can see that the way that it's being run now doesn't add any value.
As this statement reads, give me one team that would be first entering the grid that would actually be competing for podiums right away. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like this sport has the highest barrier to entry in any. This is not like buying an NBA team or a basketball team or maybe even a soccer team and being competitive right away. Like there's no way to make this happen. There's no way for you. It's not like you can just bring players over as you can in other sport and make something happen and make a go at it. Like this is a highly technical sport, highly nuanced
Yeah,
sport in the
I
way
agree.
stuff works. Like just the idea, I mean, this is a slap in the face, not just to Andretti, but to the rest of us too, right? Because it just sort of assumes like, okay, if you're not going to be competing
Yeah,
for a podium or a top five slot, like even podium, forget podium, like even top five, that's ridiculous. How can you expect that to happen? Like, what are they going to do? Go ahead and grab Max Verstappen and put him in one of the cars? Like, what are they going to do?
even then,
And even then, that wouldn't get.
yeah, so it's complete. I mean, this is another way of saying we were never going to put anybody in because if you can't compete for podiums and race wins from year one, then there's no point in having you. And the other thing about this, do you remember when F1 made a massive deal about MBS talking about the valuation of F1 and in conjunction with their potential sale to Saudi, and they sent a legal letter saying you're beyond your jurisdiction and you can't talk about this. Well, I would argue that this is the exact opposite, right?
Yep.
So the FIA are the ones that create the technical rules. They're the ones that have made the assessment. In fact, item 1 of the FIA criteria assesses the technical ability and resources of the team to be competitive. So if they have already said that it's okay that Andretti have the resources and ability to compete, then where is it that the FIA feel that they can step in on that point and make a judgment about a team's competitiveness? Because I think that is massively overstepping the mark. But ultimately, if the FIA have said it's okay, then F1 should just accept that, and it shouldn't be about what they think about that team's competitiveness. And I do agree with you, right? That yes, there's an argument about splitting the pie and protecting the teams that are there. But what we're seeing now, what can definitely happen is that protecting the teams that are there at the moment, rather than making them happy to put more investment in and become more competitive, actually goes in the other direction, and it makes them lazy and complacent. They can just hoover up the money and not have to do anything, which we've argued in this podcast is what Gene Haas has done. He has no interest in going forward. He's happy to just rake in the money. And if you dilute his share of the pie by a little bit, then he gets less of a return. So he's not going to be happy, particularly to have an 11th team in there. But my argument would be, but then that's not F1's problem particularly. If you want to get a better return on your investment, be more competitive. We've given you the conditions to do that, and you're you're squandering them, and you're happy to just sit at the back in 10th every season and just hoover up the money. So I'm sorry, but that argument to me at this point doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely senseless. Yep. No, I mean, I think again, the one thing that can be said, right, is would Andretti coming in have made the pie big enough to offset some of those and what the delta was in there, right? So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty details of that. And maybe after all the delta isn't small enough to be acceptable, right? But to again come out with these weird excuses, right? Like it's just amazing. I mean, reading all of this infuriates me, as you can probably tell.
Yes, it should do. It
You should
infuriates
have
me as
just
well.
said, hey, yeah, yeah. But yeah, go on. Then
Exactly.
you have more
We're just
there.
not going to do it, right? Okay. So the next one I wanted to talk about is quite a long one, but we can have a look. So 2025 will be the last year of the current regulatory cycle, and 2026 will be the first year of the subsequent cycle. Um, and the applicant proposes as a novice constructor to design and build a car under the 25 regulations, and then in the very next year to design and build a completely different car under the 2026 regulations. Now I'm going to bring in something from the next point here as well, because what they've said here is that while a 2026 entry would not face this specific issue, it is nevertheless the case that Formula One, as the pinnacle of world motorsport, represents a unique technical challenge to constructors of a nature that the applicant, Andretti, has not faced in any other Formula discipline in which it has
Come
previously
on.
competed, and it proposes to do so with dependency on a compulsory power unit, right? Um, and it says here that it gives us reason to question their understanding of the scope of the challenge involved.
I mean, hey,
What?
who better to be questioned about
What?
understanding the sport than an Andretti? Like, I mean, they haven't done anything ever. Like,
Oh my
how on
God.
earth could
Oh my
could
God.
they ever know? Like this, again, I just again keep seeing going back to harken back to the social media post with Mario Andretti putting in there, just being left speechless without yeah. And I mean, I just don't understand. Like, this is a bunch of word salad, right? That doesn't mean anything. It's just really, I mean, it. Again, look at what Haas has done. I agree with you. They stuck it out through those years. There's an argument to be made about like they probably wouldn't have left throughout those years too, because once you've invested, you're not just going to want to get out when things are low. So I think even that is a bit of an insincere way of kind of defending them, right? And in that, yes, of course they stuck out. What choice did they really have? What choice did they have?
I think it's the
Yeah.
most condescending
Exactly.
thing I've
It
ever
is
read
the
in my
most
life.
condescending. You're like, you stuck it out, but okay. I mean, yes, Haas and Gunther Steiner had a lot more to do with it than Haas as a team. Also, it's not like Haas was at the cutting edge of like being thereabouts. Like it was a lot of 90% of it. You could argue would be at least on track was what Gunther Steiner was doing. Yes,
Yeah.
behind the scenes, and he helped bring a lot of the deals as you just mentioned. But again, it's not like Haas carries any kind of weight in anyone's mindset. Like, I mean, look, as a Formula One fan in the United States, if you had me and if you did a poll of F1 fans in the United States, right? Haas is an American team. Haas wouldn't even make the top five of their list. And there are only 10 teams in Formula One. They wouldn't even crack the top five. I mean, look at the investment that Alpine got from a bunch of American-based celebrities and sports stars. They didn't go to Haas. I
That's
mean,
because
you
but
know,
that's because Gene Haas is actually saying no to investors, though, isn't he? So he's turned around and said, I don't want the investment. And his reason being that investors want
oh,
to
but
see a return on their investment. So I'm
if
not going to get investors in.
no one, no
What?
one, no one would even care about investing in them. Yes, I agree. Like this is a like, oh, I'm not saying no to you. You're saying no to me first kind of thing, right? But I get it. But like nobody even cares. No
But
one would care to even invest in, let alone be a hangout around in their garage if
okay,
Steiner was not there. Like he was the pull there.
so I don't want to turn this into a Haas bashing episode because we're really not trying to just talk about Haas. But this particular article I think is it's horrible. It's so condescending. It's basically saying to Andretti that despite the fact that you've built up all your resources, you've done your due diligence, you don't understand what it is you're getting into, which is absolutely ridiculous. And it goes back to what really irks me about this is that it goes back to a point that the FIF already made. They've already said that they want a competitor that is known in in other motorsport disciplines, the implication being that you have built up your resources to be competitive. Like, you're not going to apply to be an F1 because you know that you're competitive in other disciplines. And this is F1 saying, no, 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 no. We know better. We know how competitive F1 is. So therefore, you are overestimating your capabilities, despite the fact that you've got all the teams on the grid that are underperforming the way that they are. And one of the other things that really annoys me about this is that they've talked about the fact that to be competitive, to enter onto the grid in 2025, Andretti would have to take a customer engine, right? And they're making the point that to be competitive, you have to have a works engine supply. Now, I would definitely think that McLaren and
McLaren's
Aston
doing that,
Martin
right?
and Aston Martin right now are both going to be sitting there going, huh? What do you think
No,
we're doing?
I contend that in this group project, those were not the points that were sent to McLaren and Aston Martin. They probably sent those to Ferrari or Mercedes or Renault and said, yes, that's they had them do the homework on that. Like, again, it is just,
Yeah,
I cannot emphasize enough that you are slapping someone who has been a champion, who's this is their bread. And like, I cannot, you could probably find Jeff Bezos wanting to invest in the team, right? If he were entering into this, right, he would have no shortage of resources. He could build whatever. But these guys know Formula One better than anyone else that's outside of the sport right now. Like, I cannot think, this is like Schumacher coming and saying, yeah, I want to have a team there. Like, God, I mean, of course, I mean, Schumacher's, it's a different deal, but you know what I'm saying? Like, this is the American equivalent of it. Like, it just does not make any sense that, yes, of course, they would have.
It makes perfect sense if you're not looking at if you're not actually looking at the commercial, that if you're not looking at what fans want and the optics of what you're saying, it
Absolutely.
makes perfect sense.
They,
But
they, they okay, so yes, Renault engines for a year, right? A couple of years, a year, right? And then GM's coming on board. Like, this is it.
GM have said 2028, haven't they said that they'd be
Okay,
able to come in
couple of
and
years.
have a works engine. But
But
we'll come to that because F1 have addressed that particular conundrum. But I do agree with you that, like,
we're talking about General
this
Motors here. Like, this is we're
is,
not.
yeah. So to that point, let's just have a look at the next article, because this is what I find, this is another interesting one. So they've said that coming to the sport as a new power unit manufacturer is also a huge challenge, with which many major automotive manufacturers have struggled in the past, and one which can take a manufacturer a number of years of significant investment in order to become competitive. So GM have the resource and credibility, again condescending, to be more than capable of attempting this challenge. Well, thank you very much for that. But success is not assured. So I've written here in my notes, is that a warning or is it a rejection? Like, because if it's a warning, well, that's fine. These guys have
I
already
mean,
made up their minds that they're going to come into F1. But if you're going to turn around and say no, were you already going to say no? Are you using this as a reason to say no to both Andretti and GM? Does that mean that it's a closed shop to
no,
everybody,
I mean, but
including
you know what?
manufacturers?
If Andretti was bringing in Tesla, right, then they would somehow be able to make it happen. Like, I mean, GM is just whatever. Like you don't know anything about anything. Again, it is this none of this reads sane, logical in any way. Maybe there's a logic to just saying, again, if I don't want to have you over at my party, Shaz, I'm making every which way excuse that I can, instead of just telling you, hey mate, it not right now. It's not working out. I'm at capacity, or shit, I'm out of snacks, or whatever it is, right? Or you can't afford the entry fee. Like, these guys have paid $500. I'm not going to let you in at 200.
But
Like, I
they
get it.
can pay the entry fee. It's just,
No,
what
but
the
I,
hell?
I'm talking about splitting the pot, right? Like, I'm saying, okay, look, we can't. It's set for right now. See you in 28. Fair enough. Just say that.
Yeah. Yeah. But then that puts them in a difficult position as well. They have, right? They have said that, look, we would consider this in 2028. Why don't we look at the article now before we go on to the one that's irked me the most? So they've said, everyone has said, we would look differently on an application for the entry of a team into the 2028 championship with a GM power unit, either as a GM works team or as a GM customer team. So what they're saying is, okay, we're not ready to have you here now because you're not coming with a manufacturer. So the implication here is that despite everything else they've said, if Porsche turned up and said we want to be the 11th works team, then I think the criteria for this would have changed like that, and they would have said, "Yes, come in, come in. Podiums, wins. You don't need to do that ever if you don't need to. You just need to come in and have a team." But because it's Andretti, and because there's and there's clearly a we talk about this now. There's clearly some some annoyance with the way that Michael Andretti went about this. I remember in Miami in
Yep.
2022 when he was going around all of the teams and getting them to sign his little document saying that they were happy for him to come. He obviously
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
angry, and the F1 teams have said that to Stefano. Stefano's felt it himself, and the entire F1 organization has been rubbed up the wrong way. And I get that. I get that Andretti maybe didn't pursue this in the way that they should have and have made it as public as possible. And that has worked to their advantage in terms of the public outcry to this has clearly been negative. But that's not a reason to then go, right, we're not gonna do it, which is why they've had to come up with this massive document that is full of absolute nonsense. And this 2028 offer specifically irks me because it does tell me that there's a double standard, that if it's a team that comes in like Andretti with a name with a big name but no manufacturer, but despite having the resources and demonstrating that to the FIA, so the FIA have approved this on many of the points that have come up in this document, that we're not going to let you in. But if you are a manufacturer, well, then our doors are wide open. And yeah, that to me strikes, it just screams double standards, and seems massively unfair. And yeah, so annoyed about that. I want to raise this
Yeah.
point because this is the last one from the document, and then we can have a little chat about why this is all happening. But this is hilarious. So while the Andretti name carries some recognition for F1 fans,
Um,
wait for it, our research indicates that F1 would bring value to the Andretti brand rather than the other way round. Right.
I mean,
Right. So before I take your take on this, right? Um, I just want to very quickly talk about who Andretti are. So the dynasty starts with Mario, right?
yep.
So Mario's highlight for me anyway, as an F1 fan, is that he's the 1978 Formula One world champion. But he is probably the most diverse driver of all time, right? He's got 4 Champ Car championships. He's won the Daytona 500, the Indy 500, and look, I'm a UK motorsport fan. I know what it means when somebody says, "Do you think you're Sterling Moss or do you think you're Lewis Hamilton?" From what I understand, it's the equivalent there.
Yep.
That if you get stopped for speeding, it's, "Do you think you're Mario Andretti?" And that speaks to a level of impact that name has within motorsport in America. How can you ignore that? How does that not bring you any value? I don't get it. Explain to me, Amaro.
I have no way of explaining it other than this is again a money grab, right? Like this. So this is again one of those things that you cook up when you do not. It's like making up 5 lies instead of coming and telling the person directly to say, hey, look, it ain't gonna work out. Like we're not ready for you. This is not the right time. Or, better yet, if the only thing was that, the other teams don't want to split up the pie like 11 different ways, then maybe come up with an agreement where there's, a bit of a sliding scale up until, maybe 2, 3 years in, 4 years in. You could do something like that. There was the fact that there was no creativity around this, given that these teams are solving the most technical, most complicated issues that have everything to do with gaining an inch of performance, a second of performance. Like these are some of the most creative people that they couldn't find a way to make this happen. Just tells you that they never wanted to make it happen, right? And we've
Well,
established
yeah, but this point in particular, again,
but
it's so disrespectful.
it is
Like,
disrespectful. It's disrespectful beyond because for Formula One to say that the Andretti name wouldn't bring them as much value as they would, it's like, man, come on, what world are you living in?
and I don't understand how an American company Liberty Media doesn't understand the value of the biggest motorsport dynasty
They
in the
do.
US. I just don't get it.
I really
Like
think this is about the teams. We can talk about that a little bit more, but this
like
is,
we went to the circuit of the Americas a couple of
yeah.
seasons ago.
Yep.
Do you remember? Do you remember
Yes. And ready. Yeah.
Mario
Yep.
getting into the 2012 McLaren
One of the
and driving
coolest
around the track? It
surprises.
was
Yeah.
the
Amazing.
honestly, that was one of the best things I saw
Amazing.
there
Amazing.
that
Yeah. I mean,
year. It's
again,
brilliant.
I I think that if, again, and this couldn't have, again, this news, right? Short of the Lewis Hamilton news, and this is all pre that. This could have given Formula One that next level bump that they needed, right? The
Oh yeah,
survive bump, right?
absolutely.
We're at the peak of that, or we're probably a little past the peak. I think because viewership was down last year, in part because of the championship, whatnot. But really, this Andretti news would have given a newfound excitement.
Yeah,
Let's
massive
not
good news
let's
story.
not forget that there are at least a couple of US I don't know if they're citizens, but they're US based drivers, right? Colton Herta is in there. I think Alex Palau, a couple of those guys. Not to mention Jamie Chadwick was probably in the news. That could have been a seat. And oh, by the way, we have to give credit to Lewis Hamilton for this, right? Because when he was asked about the 11 team, he said, yes, I would love to have that, in part because it would be more competitive. There would be two more seats. There would be far more new jobs. And he also shouted out the fact that we could actually have a woman F1 driver on the grid. And I'm not saying
True.
that any of that would have been guaranteed. Certainly, those are different decisions that are more competitive, but the chances of that happening were far greater than they
And,
are.
and those are definitely things that bring value to your championship. If you're arguing that the 11th team won't bring value, even if you take the Andretti name out of it, two more seats for drivers on the grid
It's huge.
makes it far more interesting. Can you imagine our silly season if we had another two seats to talk about?
Yeah.
Who's coming in? Which driver from the States is coming in? Which female driver is getting their chance in the Andretti? The fact that they're not competitive at the beginning gives them a chance to go crazy on their driver. They can do
Right.
what they want. It just mental that
And the
they're that
Andretti name would have brought in more sponsors, would have brought more. If Gunther Steiner could do it with Haas, the Andretti name would have brought in a lot more.
yeah,
There
100%.
is
It's yeah,
no way that can
yeah.
be debated. Yeah,
So,
like,
so, so, so what we're concluding here on, based on this is that this is basically a fait accompli, right? They've already decided that there isn't going to be an 11th team, and for whatever reason, Andretti may have rubbed them up the wrong way and just made them a bit annoyed, whatever. But it's meant that the F1 have decided beforehand this isn't going to happen. So I just wanted to just a couple of quick things before we go on. But there was a Andretti obviously rebutted this and they came back and said, we reject the whole premise that we're not going to be competitive enough. One of the things they said was that internally we weren't planning to apply for 2025 anyway. We wanted to be in 2026. So I think off the bat that nullifies one of the biggest arguments that F1 have made, that they are underestimating the challenge, again, condescending, but that they're going to have to build a car and then build another car to a different set of rules a year later. That takes that out of it. And the second thing, which was amusing, was that F1 had written in their statement that they had sent an invitation for a face-to-face meet and had a response from Andretti. And it
damn.
came out later. It came out later. Obviously, this is another little screw that they're in to kind of say, oh, well, they're not really interested, are they? But this I found amusing was that
Amazing.
apparently once that statement came out, Andretti went through their email spam folder and found it in their spam. But it's interesting that the invitation didn't come from Dominicali. I read this in the Autosport review this from a week or two ago that actually it just came from an F1 employee. It was just a standard bog standard email, come and visit us. But it wasn't from anyone high up. You can understand why that's ended up in your spam folder if Ralph Nobody has sent you an email.
That again is one of those classic things, right? Where I give you a missed call, with no intention ever of talking with you, but saying, hey, actually, I did call you that day. You didn't pick up the phone,
You
right?
didn't
It's
pick up.
kind of one
Yeah.
of those
Where was the
things.
follow-up? Where was the
It's like,
follow-up?
yeah, or it's like, hey, or
Absolutely.
you're ringing the person and you're just hoping it goes to voicemail so you can say, hey, yeah, I called you, and then, oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy now. Like that, I'm sorry, I called you, but you didn't pick up. It is again. None of this I would have, and Stefano needs to be put on his feet need to be held on to the fire for this, because there hasn't been much explaining. They caught a big break with the Lewis Hamilton news. Otherwise, this, I know it's still continuing. folks like us are keeping it up, right? But I think the outrage will continue on this because they have not given a clear reason other than saying we just don't want to split the pie up 11 different ways. That is the only
Yeah,
argument that makes any logical sense. Everything
yeah, yeah,
else is
yeah.
is is
But
so
yeah,
marginal on at best.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Bottom line, this is about greed and this is about maintaining the status quo. The F1 are clearly happy that there are 10 teams on the grid. Having an 11th team, whoever that is, unless it's a manufacturer, let's be honest, would mean splitting the pie up 11 ways and it means less money to every team that's coming. And and I can understand why a team like Haas would not be happy with that because it means that they actually have to do something. Gene Haas is actually going to have to put in some money to make them competitive for the slice of the pie, their own slice of the pie, to go up on merit. He doesn't want that. And F1 have been happy to allow that to happen and let these teams continue to rake in what they are without having to compete against another team.
You
It's
know,
greed. This statement is basically just we are super greedy and we're going to come up with a bunch of
yeah, I mean,
nonsense excuses for why we're not going to we're not going to share our little slice of one of the biggest sports in the world.
it's
It's insane.
I mean, and again, if you think about just the Andretti name, right? Let's just assume for a second that they wouldn't be better than, eighth, ninth, and tenth the first 3, 5 years that they've been. There is no team outside of Ferrari that would hold as much value in terms of a family name, maybe Williams, right? You could say that. And then there
There
are the
is.
top teams, the Mercedes, the Red Bull, the Aston Martin. So really, they are top five. They're top 4 or 5, depending on where you want to go. So the whole idea of having them on the grid and not providing value just needs to be explained in a way that, I mean, if you're saying it costs more to have another team be shipped around, sure, but all of that is marginal.
I I
All of that is
I agree. I agree. I do want them to. I do want them to tell us what their research was. But who did they ask?
No one did. There was an intern who did that. That same intern that sent that email, right? There's an intern
But
with
who did?
with
But
an
who did that
unpaid intern.
intern?
Yeah.
Who did that intern send an email to? Did he send it to?
They
I don't know.
what
Maybe
they,
maybe
what
he
they
just
did
sent it to Stefano. Stefano, have you heard of Mario Andretti? And Stefano was like, I don't know. I
they
don't
they
know.
they asked ChatGPT to do some projections. They kind of put that in there and they're like, boom, that's it. This doesn't work. But again,
But what was the question? What was the question? Was the question if you've never heard of Andretti, if you've never heard of Andretti, have you heard of Andretti? That's the only possible
there
question
is there
I
is no
can
other. I mean,
think that they would have asked ChatGPT because that doesn't make any sense.
I mean,
Everyone's heard of Andretti.
and the Andretti name is really at the top for American racing fans, right? I mean, there are other names, Earnhardt Jr. and his dad, Dale Earnhardt, they come to mind. Jimmy Johnson to some extent, right? There are a few names in there, but again, the Andretti name is so synonymous with Formula One
Yeah,
and racing as a
absolutely.
whole, right? It just doesn't make it. It makes no
And
sense, and I think what and I know that there were some top teams that disagreed with it. I don't quite have the list of every. I think there's probably one team that said they would be okay with it, like sort of publicly. I don't know if it was McLaren or I know
I
James
thought it was
Brown was.
well, yeah, no, yeah. I
I
think
think it was
Zach
Zach
Brown
Brown who
was happy
said
with it,
that.
but
But
him and Michael Andretti are quite good friends, aren't they?
they're
So
quite good
you
friends,
can
and fair
understand
enough. So that's it.
why
But
that's happened.
but even the big team should have thought of this because again, I mean, look, if there's one thing that you're seeing out of the Lewis Hamilton move, right, is that this is the meeting of two powerhouses that is going to be great for Formula One as a whole and for all of those teams, by the way. Yes, maybe on the track, the on the track stuff, the winning, that's a different thing, right? But from a commercial perspective, the Lewis Hamilton Ferrari pairing, we're already seeing, right? Celsius is joining in as a sponsor now, and there's going to be more stuff
Mm.
happening with the way Lewis Hamilton. The Andretti name kind of follows that same path. If you sort of take that one step back and say at a broader level, right? Andretti meets F1, that is a big thing. And again, I argue that the pie could have been grown. Would it grow exponentially initially? No, absolutely not. It would take some time for that to happen. But having them in 2026 would have made sense. There's a couple of years you can do all kinds of fancy things, right? I'd argue they wouldn't be a top five team, but they certainly wouldn't be at the bottom. I mean, just given how Haas is going, and I know we're pooping all over Haas right now, but arguably they could have done better with that. Like given what has shown us, right?
Uh,
I think they could have done better. I mean,
I don't.
We Carb
I
is
don't
now
know
going
about,
to be a copy of the Red Bull, right? So they're probably going to
yeah.
do well by virtue of just doing that, right? But I mean, this is total reckless speculation. But anyway,
Yeah, I don't know about them coming in and beating another team at all in their first season. I think that's probably unlikely. Just give, and I say that because I lived through the 2010 debacle where the three teams that were
yeah,
lumped on the back of the grid basically
but
went for 5 seasons and never made it, never got a
but
point.
three versus
Yeah,
one, and this is again, this is a different situation, though. I agree with you. And again, this is sort of exaggerating, right? But I think again, I mean, look, you cannot. I mean, there are
but I
three
agree that that's
races in the
beside.
United States.
I agree that that's besides the point. That actually it shouldn't be tied into their competitiveness because the FIA have already made a judgment about that. If it's good enough for the FIA, then it should be good enough for F1. That's a simple answer to that question. Look, before we wrap up on this particular topic, I do want to just make the point that I don't think the FIA necessarily get away scot-free on this because the
Cheeky.
implication about all of this is that F1 had already decided that they weren't going to let an 11th team in. And if that's the case, the FIA shouldn't have tendered this. They shouldn't have put a tender out. I mean, there should have been a conversation between the FIA and F1 to say, do we want an 11th team? And if one of those parties is saying no, then this never happens. Because then there isn't the potential for Andretti to make this as public as they have. It means that there isn't the spend that Andretti have made to recruit and build up their resources and build up that massive facility. That all of that doesn't become a waste of money, and we don't then have this public outcry when
I
F1
mean,
inevitably just say no. So for me, part of this at least is, as I said at the beginning, this is Andretti getting caught in the crossfire in a war between, or at least a severe misunderstanding between the FIA and F1, and that speaks to a bigger problem within F1 at the moment that actually the governing body and the commercial rights holder are at odds with each other. This never would have happened in the Bernie Max era. It would have been but Bernie would have said to Max, "We need an 11th team," and Max would have been like, "Sure, let's do it." And that's how those extra teams ended up on the grid in 2010.
I think you're right. I think that
However ill-advised that was in 2010, at least there was at
that's
least there
right.
was some commonality between those two entities, which there isn't now. And it does seem much more now that F1 is beholden to the teams, and the teams are calling the shots much more. And yes, I agree, the teams are valuable, but they should not be creating your rules and regulations for you. That's not what they're there for. And you know,
It's too much
if
power.
you're
Yeah. Yeah.
it should be a decision between the FIA and F1, not the FIA and F1 slash the teams. That's not the way around it should be. But that being said, if this was never going to happen, the FIA shouldn't have opened it up. And I talked about this before. I think this has a parallel with Brexit, right? In the UK. I know that I'm opening up a can of worms here, but we're seeing Brexit was the answer to a question that nobody had really asked, and the governing, the government at the time felt, oh yeah, but we need to have this to consolidate our own power, and it's left us in a ridiculous situation where the UK are now no longer part of Europe, and in the same way, the FIA have opened up a can of worms and have answered a question that F1 did not want to ask. And that should have been clarified before any of this happened in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So I
think
think both sides, we wouldn't be having this conversation if the FIA hadn't opened up the tender. And that's why as dumb and as short-sighted, as greedy as this makes F1 look, and they are. Don't get me wrong, this is a really stupid decision. It should the way to avoid it would have been to not have the tender in the first place.
yeah, and we can spend some more time another time talking about the tension between the FIA and Formula One. I mean, we've seen that play out various different instances. I agree with you, but I also think that the FIA kind of, played their hand a little bit cheekily too, right? Like they probably knew what was going to happen. And again, if this Lewis Hamilton news does not break out, like just in the nick of time, I think the heat on Stefano and on the teams would be far more greater than what we have seen. What we have seen.
But that's not a
And I think
good thing,
that's
though, Omar.
it's not
It's
a
not
good
that
thing,
like
but
the
I mean,
governing body and the commercial rights holder shouldn't be at
yeah,
odds
I mean
with each
that's
other. They're the people
but
that are supposed to be running our sport. And if they can't even see eye to eye, then
yeah,
where is the health of our sport?
there
Where is it?
there are several machinations around this, right? One of which is I think there's sort of a passive aggressive way move being put together to kind of have the ownership be changed as well, right? So that sort of bleeds into other battles that are out there too. But
That's why
yeah,
that's what I worry about. I think we probably should
well,
end on this because I think we've gone on for a long
we've
time
gone
now.
on for a while.
But the battle in F1 should be on track between the teams. It shouldn't be a battle at a governance level.
I agree.
That's not where I need
No,
to see
I
my
agree.
that's not where I need to see my war. I want to see it on track. So this game of one-upmanship, whoever comes up on top, the only thing that suffers is Formula One and us as fans because
I know.
we are not getting what we want.
I totally agree with you. Can I have the last word as a disgruntled fan
Please.
today? Yeah. If I'm the Andretti's, I am going to each and every Grand Prix this year, and especially the three that are in the United States, wearing whatever my Andretti team t-shirts or regalia or apparel would have been. And I am standing there right next to that last pit box every single race. I am walking the grid. I am making it be known. I am talking to Martin Brundle every damn a race before a race starts. Like I am doing that because I'm going to shame the heck out of them because that is what they totally deserve.
And there you go. If you want to find Amar at a Formula One race, just look for the
The
loony
Andretti t-shirt.
in an Andretti t-shirt trying to get on the grid. Uh, so that's been another episode. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. This one will go up on our podcast channel as well. So please leave us a 5-star review. Amar, it's been great. Thanks for that.
It's been great. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.